The story begins with a beautiful girl sitting before His Highness and telling him that she was originally from the Terry Empire. It was obvious to the naked eye that she was very worried. Running her hands through her elegant dress, the girl continued to say that she was not going to control His Highness and follow his every step, nor was she going to become Winfred's respected queen dowager. Finally, the girl added that she could confidently assure that at the moment, she was absolutely sure that she would cope with all the state affairs of the empire. His Highness, who was sitting opposite the girl, was shocked by her frankness and asked what was the reason for her insistence. He was a handsome, blue-eyed man with silver hair. He did not take his eyes off the beautiful woman sitting opposite him and waited for her answer. The girl thought for a moment, and for the first few minutes did not dare to give an honest answer to His Highness's question. But then the girl admitted that she had been handling business matters for Duke Vistache for the past 10 years. So she was sure that she would be able to handle the affairs of state of the empire. The girl thought of all those long winter days spent in the Duchy of Vistache, busy with business papers. She was cold not only from the frost outside, but also from the Duke's attitude towards her. Suddenly, His Highness asked how long ago the girl broke off her engagement to Duke Vistache, and she honestly answered that it had happened quite recently. And in addition, she gave her name, Nevea, Salty. The man, as if enchanted, repeated her first and last name and looked at the girl again, because it was she who had boldly asked him a moment ago if he was looking for a bride. There were many words that could describe Nevea's state at that moment, but she believed that everything she was about to do would only benefit her in the future. So, Nevea took off her gloves and looked into His Highness' eyes. The girl rose from her chair and bowed before His Highness. She said that she was sure that he felt quite uncomfortable in this situation, so she took the courage to be honest and straightforward with him. Joachim the 12th Winfried watched Nevea's every move, and the girl boldly said that she asked for his hand and heart. The man looked at the young girl in shock and did not know what to say because he had never been in such a situation before. Joachim could not have even dreamed that one day the most beautiful girl in the empire would ask him for permission to marry her, and this made him both scared and curious at the same time. Nevea Solon was the daughter of the Marquis Solon, although her childhood in a wealthy family was hardly a happy one. All she remembers from childhood are the constant threats and reproaches of her stepmother. Meeting the girl in the hallway, the stepmother pointed a threatening finger at her and asked if she had warned Solon not to go around the estate when her father was away. It was clear that this woman simply hated the poor child. The woman shouted contemptuously that her punishment would be to sit in the attic room, and the girl would not be allowed to go down to the lower floors until she gave her permission. Everyone in the estate knew that Nevea was the daughter of the Marquis Solon's maid. The attic room was already familiar to Nevea. If you think back to all the years of her childhood, she spent most of it there. Approaching the window, the girl began to knock on it so that at least some fresh air could enter this musty room. Only when the little girl opened the window did she feel more or less comfortable, and spent almost all her time looking out into the street and whistling some familiar tunes. Nevea's stepmother was most delighted when they managed to conclude a marriage contract with the Vistache family and thus get rid of the annoying child. All the servants of the estate also gossiped that Nevea had been sold for a rather good price. This marriage contract had been agreed upon long before she was born. Now the girl was a victim of a political marriage. For Nevea, the world had always been cruel, so this turn of fate did not surprise her at all. A little boy with inky hair was sitting at the table when the butler came in and said that Mr. Valor was expected by a teacher after history lessons to teach him marksmanship. Nevea, now an adult, asked the maid where Valor was. The maid hurried to report that the master had gone to the Imperial and would be back home quite late. Then Nevaeh said that she wanted to rest a little alone and asked the maid not to let anyone go up to the third floor. The maid replied that she would do everything as the mistress ordered. On the way to the office, Nevaeh was haunted by the thought that she absolutely did not want to see her fiancé's face. It was simply disgusting to her, so she was glad of this opportunity to be alone. She remembered all the times she had tried to reach out to her fiancé and talk to him about something. But her fiancé's only response was that they had nothing to discuss together. Nevaeh reminded him that she was his fiancée, so they had something to discuss. But Valère, without turning to the girl, replied that this engagement was just an agreement between their parents long before they were born. Nevaeh did not want to agree to this, and noted that despite this, she still remained his fiancée. So she did not understand why he could discuss matters with anyone but her. The man seemed to understand what was being said and coldly replied that Miss Eustace was a beautiful person. Nevaeh objected that Eustace was only beautiful to him, as there was gossip that she actually liked him. Valère didn't even stop making notes in his documents, and without turning around, replied that it didn't matter, because he didn't show any feelings for Justice yet. Then Nevaeh asked, what about Simorion's son? Hearing this name, Valère put down his pen and said that it was just a nice acquaintance of his. But Nevaeh noticed that he was too friendly to Valère, and she didn't like it. Then Valère got angry and shouted that she was crossing all sorts of boundaries. Nevaeh had never seen him this angry before, so she began to worry for her safety. The girl explained that Valère had never spoken to her directly, so she had no choice but to ask him such questions. There was an awkward pause between the young people, and the girl, trying to somehow explain the situation, said that the groom behaves kindly towards others, but treats his bride quite harshly. Valère looked at his future wife and coldly replied that all of this was just her sick fantasies, because he behaved the same way with everyone, and it made no difference to him who his interlocutor was. Valère Vistage was the ideal model of a knight. He was a man trusted by the emperor himself, to the envy of all the nobility. Valère was also known as the most perfect and impeccable man in the world. And Nevaeh Solon was his fiancée, who had been trying to get his attention for 10 years. The girl wanted to trust him completely, but apparently Valère didn't need her feelings. One day, while out for a walk, Nevaeh was informed that Valère had returned wounded. Meanwhile, the man threw off his blood-stained clothes and went to take a bath, while his fiancée ran headlong home. The first thing Nevaeh did was to find out about her fiancé's condition and ran into his bathroom to ask if he was okay. She was in such a hurry that her heart almost jumped out of her chest. Valère just looked contemptuously at his fiancée and said that they would talk later. Nevaeh had no choice but to simply leave the room without even finding out what really happened to him. As soon as Nevaeh found out that she was engaged to Valère Vistage, she had a burning hope that she would be able to create her own family, where she would be loved and needed by someone. She dreamed of a beloved husband and children who would surround her with warmth and care. But unfortunately, these dreams were shattered by the heartlessness and cruelty of her fiancé. Therefore, in the new estate of Vistage, Nevaeh felt unwanted by anyone, just like she did in her own family. On Nevaeh's room, apologizing for the intrusion and announcing that they had a guest, the maid reported that Lady Eustace was waiting for Mr. Valère downstairs. While the groom was busy, Nevaeh decided to deal with this unpleasant lady herself and went downstairs. The girl immediately said that the Duke had gone to the Imperial and advised Lady Eustace to come another time. Lady Eustace just smiled cheekily and said that it might be true if Mrs. Solon wasn't lying. Eustace said that, of course, she could believe Nevaeh, but it was hard to take the words of a person with such a poor past as the truth. Nevaeh barely held back her emotions, and Eustace continued to tell her that there were many rumors about Milady Nevaeh's origins, and it wasn't just her own opinion. Then Nevaeh couldn't hold back and gave Eustace a good slap. An angry Nevaeh asked Lady Eustace to shut her mouth, as no one would allow her to discuss the details of her origin in the presence of the landlady. Lady Eustace, who had not expected the blow, rubbed her cheek. Looking into the eyes of the enraged Nevaeh, Lady Eustace shouted that she was indeed the daughter of some worthless person and that her birth into the world was a regrettable mistake that needed to be corrected. Her cheek burned with pain and anger took over, and Lady Eustace no longer controlled her words. But Nevaeh was no longer going to silently endure all the humiliation, especially from a lady who was openly encroaching on her place in this family and openly demonstrating her feelings to her fiancé. So Nevaeh slapped Justice again and reminded her to think first and then open her mouth. Lady Eustace attacked Nevaeh with her fists because she also did not intend to swallow the insult, especially from a girl about whose origin the most indecent rumors were circulating. At this time, Valor entered the room. The man angrily asked what they were doing here. Valor's gaze stopped on Lady Eustace's swollen and reddened cheek, so he threw an angry look at his bride and asked how she dared to do that to Mrs. Eustace. Valor approached Lady Eustace and, placing his hand on her shoulder, suggested that she be examined immediately by the family doctor. He immediately apologized to Eustace on behalf of Nevaeh. Solon promised that he would sort it out soon. Before leaving, Valor gave his fiancée a look that made her insides go cold. He said he had no idea Nevaeh would indulge in such indecent behavior when he wasn't around. Nevaeh wanted him to know the truth and began to tell him that things were not as he thought. But Valor ordered her to shut up, as he had not asked Nevaeh to explain anything and advised her to return to her chambers immediately. This was the last straw in the relationship between Nevaeh and Valor, so the girl decided to write a letter in which she officially broke off her engagement with him. Nevaeh decided to return to the family estate. The butler hurried to his mistress to help her and informed her that the carriage was already waiting for her at the exit. The girl, without hurrying, dressed and examined the things she had packed for the trip. After putting on her hat, Nevaeh turned to the butler and asked him to help her with her luggage. The man said that of course he would fulfill her request and started to carry the suitcases. During his stay at the Vistache estate in Nevaeh, he and the butler developed a rather warm relationship, so he asked the girl what she was going to do when she returned to the family estate. Nevaeh stopped and looked into her husband's eyes, and then she said with confidence that as soon as she returned to the Solon estate, she was going to get married. The butler almost fell from shock when he heard her plans. This happened at the time when Emperor Winfried was on a short visit to the Terry Empire. His Highness Joachim XII was an enviable bachelor, and every aristocrat only dreamed of becoming his wife. The purpose of His Highness's arrival was to conclude a political marriage, and while Valor was on the battlefield, it was Nevaeh who remained the Duke's confidant. She understood that all power was concentrated in the hands of the Empress. During the time that Emperor Winfried died and Joachim XII ascended the throne, Nevaeh conducted business on behalf of the Duke and came across some secret and rather interesting documents. Nevaeh decided to convince Emperor Winfried at all costs and do everything to marry him because only then would she be able to gain real power in her own hands. All the way to her native estate, Nevaeh pondered her next steps until a servant announced that they had arrived and helped the girl out of the carriage. Nevaeh looked around the painfully familiar places with fear, and all the pictures from her unhappy childhood appeared in her memory. Then she heard her father talking to a girl. The little girl asked her father if he would take her to the Imperial next time. The father replied that he could give his daughter anything she wanted. He was ready to lay it all at her feet. Then the girl smiled and said that she wanted the sword, but on condition that it was real. The girl remarked that it would be rather tactless if the heiress of the House of Solon did not wield a sword. Nevaeh was, of course, interested in what her father would say to such a proposal from his youngest daughter, but the girl had no time for their chatter, and she went ahead. Duke Solon, seeing Nevaeh, froze in place. Nevaeh's father was never happy to see his eldest daughter, especially after so many years of her absence. He had already forgotten what she looked like and hoped that fate would never bring them together. Valor shared his thoughts with his friend, saying that he didn't understand why he should get married if two strangers just woke up with the idea of entering into a political marriage in the future. Comrade Valera said that his father probably understood that he would need the help of the Terra Empire to become more influential, so he advised Valera not to be upset about it. The young man said with a smile that thanks to Valor, they would be able to make a fortune, and advised him not to worry about it, because he would do everything possible to get Valor back here as soon as possible. Valor looked at his friend with gratitude and said that there was no need for this, advising him to concentrate better on his work. He was sure that his friend only wished him well. All of Valor's thoughts at that time were focused on the incident that had occurred between Lady Eustace and his fiancée. He had not even expected Lady Eustace to say such words, for he had a better opinion of her. Valor recalled that after the fight, a butler came to him and informed his master that he needed to know all the details of the quarrel between the bride and Lady Eustace, because the butler was very impressed with the decent and sincere Nevaeh. Salty. After listening to the butler, Valor concluded that his fiancée had every reason to be so angry. And at that moment, the man thought that if he were in Nevaeh's place, he would have done the same thing. Valor moved on with his friend and decided not to fill his head with empty thoughts, because everything that happened was already in the past, and he should think about the future. At this time, two men witnessed a conversation between Valor and his friend. One of them said that he had heard only good things about Valor Vistache, so he didn't want it to turn out to be just empty rumors. A man in the cloak remarked that he had not expected to hear such details when he was going for a walk, but his companion remarked with a smile that their walk was more like some kind of espionage. The man in the cloak looked at his partner displeasedly and grumbled that it would be much better if he shut his mouth, because he hadn't asked his opinion on the matter. The young man smiled and said that only death would silence him. Then the man in the cloak advised his friend not to test his patience, because his death might come sooner than he thought. The mutt bowed and said that he was only telling the truth and that he could hardly do anything about it, and then advised the man in the cloak to take care of his own health. The man in the cloak took off his hat, and it turned out that Emperor Winfred was disguised under it. His assistant reminded him that they had a lot of business, and it was time for them to return to the palace as soon as possible. Seeing his eldest daughter, the father thought that this illegitimate child probably considered himself the heir to the family. Meanwhile, Nevaeh bowed and told her father that they had not seen each other for a long time. The Marquise of Solene irritably asked Nevaeh if she was sure her feet had taken her to the right place. He was not happy that his peaceful life had been disturbed by his eldest daughter. The girl looked at the unfamiliar girl with curiosity, and Nevaeh decided to introduce herself. She gave her name and told the girl that she was her older sister. The Duke angrily said through gritted teeth that he had never considered her his daughter and advised her to return to the Vistache estate immediately. If she followed his advice, he would pretend that he had not seen anyone there. The Marquis took his youngest daughter by the shoulders and headed for the estate. But Nevaeh coldly replied that, unfortunately, she would not take advantage of his offer, since she had broken the silence with Valor Vistache. The Marquis stopped for a moment and looked at Nevaeh. He asked if she had any common sense left. Her father threatened that for such a daring act, he would not allow her to return to this estate anyway. But Nevaeh calmly replied that the father shouldn't tear his throat like that in the presence of the child, because it's quite rude, and he might scare the little girl. Passing by her shocked father, Nevaeh approached the girl and asked if she was okay. The girl replied that she was fine. Nevaeh turned and gave her father a disdainful look, suggesting that he come into the estate. When they were left alone in the study, Nevaeh spread out the documents in front of the Duke and said that the payment for her stay, which the Solon family was supposed to send to the Vistash family, had never arrived. The girl continued that now that their engagement was broken, Daddy had to pay a tidy sum of money to the Vistash family. If he didn't want to do that, he would have to accept her terms. Nevaeh said that his rejected daughter had to spend her own money to cover these debts and asked what he thought would happen when this fact was made public to aristocratic society. The father was silent and looked at his adult daughter, not believing that she had become so financially literate. Nevaeh asked if he thought it would be better to appear in disgrace before the Vistash family. The father couldn't stand it and shouted that he had the strength. Didn't she think that if she managed to corner him, he would hand over the management of the finances to her? The Marquise didn't expect Nevaeh to speak to him so boldly. But Nevaeh replied in a calm voice that she had already hidden all her account books in a safe place and would like to remind the Marquise that his daughter must also maintain her reputation. And while the father raged and called his daughter the last curse words, Nevaeh said that these were not such difficult demands, so she hoped that the Marquis of Solon would definitely fulfill them. The Marquis calmed down and let out a doomed sigh. He understood that having such trump cards up Nevi's sleeve could put an end not only to his reputation, but also to the future of his youngest daughter, so he asked what he should do. Nevaeh said that, first of all, she needed a separate building in which she would stay for 15 days. She immediately warned him not to try to interfere with her stay. The girl then continued that the second requirement was that she must receive full support from the Solon family, and she also needed a pass to the imperial palace to take some things. Nevaeh remembered the girl she had seen next to her father and said that she was probably not even 14 years old, so it was unlikely that she had made her debut in the aristocratic world. Hearing this, her father exploded with rage and stood up from his chair. The Marquess began to shout at her not to involve her younger daughter in dirty business and advised her to watch her tongue before opening her mouth. But Nevaeh looked boldly at her parents and did not even blink an eye at his threats. The girl said that she was not going to repeat her conditions twice and that she could no longer be indulged in the way she had been before. So she was waiting for a balanced and correct decision from her father. The next morning, Nevaeh went to the most modern atelier in the city. She was greeted warmly by a saleswoman who was delighted that the girl was interested in the latest collection of dresses, which were selling rather slowly this time. The saleswoman suggested that Lady Solon look at last year's outfits, warning the girl that they were a little out of fashion. But Nevaeh replied that it was not important and ordered that everything in the store be wrapped. The saleswoman circled around Lady Solon, showering the girl with compliments. Nevaeh was somewhere far away in her thoughts, so she only added that the bill should be written out in the name of the Marquis Solon. At this time, Valor returned home and was shocked to hear that Nevaeh had signed a document terminating their engagement. He asked the butler in surprise why a person who did not dare to say anything against her would suddenly do such a thing. Valor read the document again. The butler did not take his eyes off his master and only confirmed that Nevaeh had personally signed this contract. The man also added that Lady Nevaeh had packed all her belongings and left for the family estate. Although Valère was tired after the long journey, saying that he had no other choice but to follow his bride, he ordered the butler to prepare the carriage. The butler was seriously worried about his master and cautiously reminded him that it was too late, advising Valera to take a break from the road and wait until morning. But Valor said in all seriousness that when it came to the return of his fiancée, there was no point in thinking about time. The butler bowed and said that he understood everything. Nevaeh had just arrived at the family estate with a whole bunch of new things. The entire carriage was filled to the brim with boxes of beautiful dresses, and the girl had the things taken to her room. The father met Nevaeh with complaints that she shouldn't test his patience and spend so much of his savings at once. The Marquis shouted that there should be some limit to her extravagance and that she shouldn't use his support so thoughtlessly. The Hevia asked her father what exactly he called support. She wondered if he considered support to be the premature clothes they gave her, or the pennies he gave her a couple of times for expenses, or the fact that he sold his own daughter to someone else's family. Nevaeh noticed that her father was scolding her simply for buying herself a lot of things, even though he had promised the girl this afternoon to lay at her feet anything she wished for. The Marquis was very irritated when it came to his youngest daughter, so this time he exploded with rage, shouting that Nevaeh should not compare herself and her younger sister. The girl listened to him calmly and said that Nevaeh Solon is his daughter, just like her younger sister. And then she pointed out that she had done nothing that could tarnish the reputation of the Solon family. The father had no answer to give his eldest daughter, so he simply stared at Nevaeh in silence. The girl proudly turned away and headed towards her building, while the Marquis and his wife watched her for a long time. Late in the evening, Nevaeh decided to get some fresh air and gather her thoughts. Throwing a warm blanket over her shoulders, the girl went outside. The night was starry and warm, which could not but please the upset girl. Suddenly, she saw a male figure approaching her. When Nevaeh managed to make out the stranger, she was almost speechless because Valor was standing in front of her. The man explained that fortunately he knew where to look for her, so he quickly found her. Nevaeh did not expect to see her fiancé here, and she did not expect him to be looking for her. The girl lowered her eyes and asked if the butler had given him the papers to break off the engagement. Valor explained that this was the reason he had come to her so urgently. The man asked why Nevaeh had decided to sign these documents so suddenly. He thought that the girl simply wanted to attract attention to herself. But Nevaeh replied that Valor was the first to sign the agreement to end their engagement before going to the battlefield. In all the 10 years they had lived together, he had never paid so much attention to her. The girl recalled that it was Valor who had initiated the breakup of their engagement, so she had simply complied with his wishes. It was painful for her to admit that her fiancé had only paid attention to her after the documents had already been signed. Valor lowered his eyes and admitted that he had really wanted them to break off the engagement earlier, but Nevaeh had not paid attention to it before. Therefore, he was interested in the question of what had happened and why she had decided to take this step. Nevaeh shouted for him to stop talking because she had already made her final decision. She said, with tears in her eyes, that she no longer loved him. Nevaeh explained to him that loving him was a waste of time, so she had had enough. Valor said he didn't understand what she was talking about. Nevaeh sadly replied that he wouldn't understand because she thought everything was logical. Valor dryly replied that Nevaeh had no reason to love him, and her primitive emotions were simply ridiculous. It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over the girl. His words about primitive emotions were swirling in her head, and she couldn't understand how she could love a man who didn't feel any feelings. Nevaeh remembered how, full of hopes for a new, happy life, she first came to the Vistash estate. And then all the terrible years of living in his family flashed through her thoughts, and she, looking into his eyes, confidently said that she would never return to his house again in her life. The next morning, the girl overheard her maids talking. The maids were arguing about how shameless Nevaeh had returned to the estate as if nothing had happened, and wondering why Valor had never married her during the 10 years that Nevaeh had spent on his estate. The girl went up to her nanny and asked why the maid said only nasty things about her older sister, because she didn't think Nevaeh was bad and didn't understand why the maid spoke so much about her. The nanny told the girl that she had clung to the Duke like a leech and had sucked everything she could out of him all these years. And now she had returned to the Solon estate and was acting as if she were the heiress of the Marquis. The nanny emphasized that the little miss should not even try to be like her older sister. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Nevaeh, who had come inside, said that she would hurry to disappoint her, but the fact that they were sisters would not go away. Nevaeh approached her younger sister and said that it was quite crowded here, so she would like to get rid of some unpleasant personalities and talk to Rabiel alone. The younger sister looked at Nevaeh with joy and said that of course she didn't mind and would immediately order everyone to leave the room, asking the older sister to wait a bit. The nanny immediately covered her younger sister with her dress, and the girl, surprised, said that she just wanted to talk to Nevaeh and everything would be fine. But the nanny shouted that nothing good would come of it and that they had nothing to discuss. The nanny shouted for Nevaeh to get out of the way. The girl calmly looked at the angry nanny and said that she was curious how an ordinary nanny could address her mistress as you. And while the nanny was mumbling something and didn't know what to say to Nevaeh, she came closer to the woman and asked if she really thought that if Rabiel was a servant, she didn't consider it proper to treat the eldest daughter of the Solon family with dignity. Nevaeh began to think aloud that a nanny who allowed herself to ignore her mistress's words and even raise her voice at her did not deserve to raise the youngest daughter of the Solon family. The servants closed their mouths and stood as if rooted to the spot. They didn't even know what to say to Nevaeh, while the girl continued to think about what exactly depended on her, what the answer would be, and she wanted them to leave the room immediately. Approaching Rabiel, she said that she just wanted to be alone with her sister and apologized to the girl for having to show her sister her worst side. Rabiel assured her older sister that everything was fine, but Nevaeh emphasized that even though her nanny was worried about her, she shouldn't let the servants look down on the masters. Nevaeh advised her younger sister to immediately contact her father if ever again any of the servants dared to disobey her orders. Rabiel listened very carefully to her older sister and tried to remember every word she said. Meanwhile, Nevaeh added that their father had a special relationship with Rabiel, so he would fulfill all her requests without fail. Nevaeh apologized again for disturbing her younger sister without warning, but she had an urgent matter for the girl. And then the girl pulled out her golden pass to the Imperial and invited her younger sister to have some fun. A magnificent banquet was organized in the Duchy of Silas. Nevaeh, wearing a festive dress, descended the pompous stairs and mentally repeated Valér's instructions, not to stand out, to know her place, and to behave quieter than grass. As the Duke's confidant, Nevaeh was only expected to greet people she hadn't seen in a long time. The girl almost always followed her fiancé's instructions when he was away on business, and it was up to her to represent the Vistache family. Nevaeh decided to take a walk in the fresh air and went out into the garden. All her thoughts were with Valerie. And although her fiancé was very harsh and cold with the girl, she continued to hope that one day he would love her as much as she loved him. Then Nevaeh overheard two men discussing marriage. One of them emphasized that there had been quite a few proposals, while the other replied that all of them had been selected by his mother, so he personally was not satisfied with any of the options. The young man asked His Highness what he would say about a girl from a humble family who was also on the list of candidates for his hand and heart. Joachim XII replied that the girl was certainly not bad, But she suffered so much from loneliness and demanded so much attention that in the end, she could not cope with her feelings and committed suicide. The emperor's aide said that such a sad ending could happen again, but Joachim XII explained that he dreamed of finding a bride with whom he would have a good relationship but without feelings. The assistant smiled and said that it would be quicker to find a fairy as a soulmate or dance with a unicorn than to find a girl who would agree to just remain friends with a man. Nevaeh, hearing such a comparison, smiled softly, and the emperor's assistant continued to emphasize that none of the girls stood before such a handsome man as Joachim XII. His tall one smiled and said, "Does the assistant really think he's handsome?" The assistant, pouting, said that it was just a reservation, and he meant that no one could resist the charms of a loving man. The last thing Nevaeh heard was Joachim XII saying that he was tired of love, but he would still need to get married because of his status, so he would do so very soon. Now that Nevaeh remembered that conversation, she thought that perhaps the emperor would also think it was strange, but she could say with certainty that Joachim XII was right about love being exhausting. Looking out the carriage window, Nevaeh carefully considered her every step until her younger sister asked why they had gone to the imperial palace so unexpectedly. Rabiel recalled that the day before, her older sister had said that she needed help from her and therefore wanted to know in more detail what exactly she needed to do. Nevaeh explained that it had been a while since she had last attended a soiree, and many people had strange expressions on their faces when they saw her, which was why Nevaeh wanted Rabiel to accompany her. Rabiel said that now she understood everything, and the only thing that confused her was that they didn't warn their father. But Nevaeh reassured her sister, telling her not to even worry about it. The older sister assured her that as long as Rabiel was with her, her father would not worry. Rabiel breathed a sigh of relief, and Nevaeh looked out the window again and lost herself in her thoughts. She knew that her father would be released in an hour and caught herself thinking that she had become tougher than before. Vistash was also in a hurry to attend this invited banquet. He had not yet had time to recover from the breakup of his engagement, so he was in a very bad mood, which his friend immediately asked about. The man noticed that Valor looked rather strange today, and it was the first time he had seen him in such a bad condition. And although Valor tried to somehow assure him that everything was fine, his friend didn't really believe it. The man said that Valor must have looked so bad because of the breakup of the engagement, because it's the #1 topic in social circles right now, and he hurried to congratulate Vistash on canceling this unsavory contract. Then the man changed the subject of conversation and began to wonder what the Winfreds were up to. He was interested in what they were trying to achieve with their demands for candidates for His Highness's hand and heart. Valor looked at his interlocutor in surprise and asked him to repeat what he had just said. The comrade noted that he understood everything because Valor was now worried about his situation and had promised to introduce Vistash to his cousin. Valor thanked him for his concern, but emphasized that he was not interested in marriage right now. His friend noted that diving into a new relationship so quickly was quite irrational, and he was glad that Valor was behaving with restraint, unlike Nevaeh. Vistash immediately asked what had happened to Lady Solen. His friend explained that as soon as she crossed the threshold of her own house, she immediately began to visit salons and buy up everything she wanted. Valor thought that his former fiancée seemed to be doing well. He remembered that when he saw the maid packing her things, he asked if they all belonged to Lady Solen, to which the maid replied in the affirmative. Valor looked in surprise at the dresses and clothes lying on the floor and did not understand why she had left them after leaving for the family estate. He immediately called the butler and asked if Nevaeh had taken all her things when she left. The butler explained that the luggage contained only writing instruments, 5 books, and 2 tea sets. That was all that Mrs. Nevaeh had. Solen took it with her when she went to her father's estate. Then, Valor asked if they were really talking about the same Lady Solène. The butler said that before leaving, Nevaeh had emphasized that she was leaving all these things here because they belonged to the Vistache. Now, when he learned that after his departure, his ex-fiancée had bought up almost all the fashionable things, he was surprised by her act and decided not to bother his head with thoughts about Nevaeh anymore. Meanwhile, the two daughters of the Solon family had already entered the banquet hall. Rabiel, who had never been to a social event before, admired the well-dressed aristocrats and the exquisite interior of the living room. Rabiel saw the young ladies she had already met at home and asked Nevaeh to leave so she could talk to them for a while. Nevaeh replied that Rabiel could play with them until midnight. Rabiel happily jumped to her friends, and Nevaeh was finally left alone. She didn't want her younger sister to witness her being bullied in high society, so she was happy about this turn of events. The girl heard that the lady was gossiping about her, saying that this shameless woman had come to the reception immediately after breaking off her engagement, and they did not understand how she had dared to commit such a bold act. Everyone knew that Duke Vistache was also present at this reception, so they did not understand how Nevaeh dared to take such a step. The girl herself, passing by the emperor, thought it would be better to talk to him alone. Nevaeh immediately found Joachim the 12th surrounded by beautiful young ladies and thought that now all that remained was to talk to him somehow. But the question remained how to steal him from this crowded hall. Eustace approached her, who said in surprise that she had not expected them to meet so soon. Nevaeh smiled tightly and said that she was also glad to see Lady Eustace at this social event. At that moment, Nevaeh thought that this was the only thing she was missing. Eustace said with a sly smile that she had heard the latest news about Lady Solène's broken engagement and was worried about her. Nevaeh thanked her for her concern, but emphasized that she did not understand how Lady Eustace was involved in this. Justice replied with satisfaction that it didn't matter, since she was the one who witnessed such a grandiose event in social life. And she expressed her disappointment that other young ladies didn't get to see it. Nevaeh understood perfectly well that the only thing Justice was trying to achieve was to humiliate Valera's former fiancé in front of the entire crowd. Nevaeh glanced around the crowd and wondered how many of them had gathered here. Nevaeh boldly told Eustace that she too was uncomfortable looking at the tear-swollen face of the esteemed Mrs. Eustace, but that expression on her face was worth it. Then Nevaeh remembered that she was not alone and that her former fiancé was also a witness. Lady Eustace replied that she was grateful to Duke Vistache for the care he had given her that day. But Nevaeh replied that anyone would be concerned if they saw a wrinkled girl with a swollen cheek. Eustace stopped Nevaeh and said that she felt very sorry for Nevaeh, who could not recover from the breakup of her engagement. Lady Eustace asked Nevaeh loudly if she was tired of being treated this way. She felt like the victor in this battle and thought that Duke Valor had broken off the engagement for her sake. Gossip spread throughout the hall, and the aristocrats began to express their sympathy for the poor Duke, who had lived with such an unbearable girl for 10 years. They decided that such a terrible character was inherent only in people of low birth. Nevaeh was very interested in the question of how a person from a different social circle, who did not know the nobles of the Terry Empire, would react when they saw what was happening here. At that moment, the girl put everything on the line. The girl counted on the support of Joachim the 12th, because after hearing his conversation in the garden, she felt that he was a good man. Otherwise, these aristocrats would tear poor Nevaeh to pieces. Nevaeh could not allow herself to lose this battle. She mentally turned to the emperor, who had his back to her, and begged him for help. At that time, the girl really counted on his mercy and protection. The girl was left alone in front of a raging crowd that wanted her blood and humiliation. Lady Eustace also felt her superiority and the support of the aristocrats present. But a real miracle happened, and Joachim XII, as if hearing Nevaeh's plea, covered her with his back and indignantly asked Lady Justice what she was doing here. Sometime later, His Highness asked his assistant if this was the last event planned. He was already tired of wandering around the banquets and parties of the aristocrats of the Terry Empire and was already dreaming of returning home. The assistant confirmed that this was the last event, noting that His Highness had already rejected all the candidates he was scheduled to meet with today. He reminded him that he had 2 days left to decide on a bride. The emperor said that he had become convinced, based on his own observations, that human relationships in the empire were too simple. And the aide reminded him that in order to get married, it was enough to simply find a partner. And Joachim XII was too stubborn. His Highness agreed, but couldn't figure out what he should do when no one came to mind. The aide cursed himself mentally and wished he could hit the fool right now. The man said he had heard rumors that Duke Vistash had broken off his engagement yesterday and suggested that it was a fashionable trend not to get married. He reminded the emperor that his marriage would be one of convenience, so he shouldn't expect anything grand from the relationship. Joachim XII went somewhere, and the assistant followed him. He asked His Highness where they were going, and Joachim XII said that quite a few people had gathered in the center of the hall, and that something interesting was probably happening there. The emperor said that they should definitely look into it, too, and the assistant, who was keeping up with his master, asked with trepidation whether His Highness was going to intervene in the local squabbles. The emperor looked at his assistant mysteriously and said that he should have studied his master over his long years of service and understood that he was interested in such things. Joachim entered the crowd and, together with his assistant, watched Lady Justice's attacks towards Nevaeh. The emperor mentally noted that he had not thought the same about the Terry Empire. His Highness was not going to stand aside when the poor girl was attacked by the entire crowd. So he blocked her with his broad shoulder and asked Lady Eustace, who gave her the right to behave like that. The emperor said loudly that he could not see in the assembled aristocrats even a hint of belonging to the high society they were so proud of. Shocked, Nevaeh could not believe her luck. The girl was happy that her plan had worked and she had won the game. She looked around and found her ex-fiancé among the crowd, who was staring at her and was more shocked than she was by what was happening. The crowd immediately began to disperse, feeling guilty about what had happened, because none of the aristocrats wanted to be involved in the dirty business of harassing Nevaeh, especially since the emperor himself had taken up the cause. The frightened Lady Eustace stepped back, her lips only able to utter the emperor's name. She had not expected anyone to come to Nevaeh's defense, especially such a powerful person. His Highness smiled and, looking into Lady Eustace's eyes, said that he was glad that the lady recognized him. There was complete silence in the hall, and no one dared to utter a word. The emperor looked around at the aristocrats present and said that he was surprised by their behavior, and this surprise was far from for the better. His Highness noted that apparently there were no worthy noblesses in the Terry Empire. Nevaeh herself felt uncomfortable that such an influential man had stood up for her, so she touched his hand as if hinting that he should stop reprimanding the local nobles. Joachim XII turned to the young girl and asked how she was feeling. He told her to calm down and assured her that everything would be fine. Confused, Nevaeh lowered her eyes and did not know what to say to him. Then His Highness suggested that she go to the restroom to tidy herself up and asked permission to take her there. Nevaeh shyly replied that she would not refuse such an offer. The emperor took her by the hand and led her to the recreation room. All the aristocrats looked on in shock, unable to believe that His Highness had come to the defense of this shameless woman. Valor Vistache also couldn't believe his eyes and couldn't even move from shock. Nevaeh's former fiancé stood there as if rooted to the spot until His Highness and the girl hid behind the closed door. When the young people were left alone in the room, His Highness assured them that no one would dare to come here while he was here, and told Nevaeh that she needed to be in a quiet place so she could stay here as long as she wanted. His Highness said that if she wanted to be a fun, he could leave. But the girl assured him that everything was fine, as if hinting that he should stay with her. Joachim the 12th looked at the young girl standing before him and concluded that she looked like a doll. He had been very concerned about her well-being, but now he was convinced that it was in vain. The emperor asked Nevaeh if this had ever happened to her before. The girl frankly admitted that it happened as often as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Then the emperor smiled and asked how she managed to keep falling into the same trap. The young girl raised her eyes and looked at the emperor. She timidly asked if she had looked helpless during her conversation with Lady Eustace. Then the emperor did not even find anything to answer her. Joachim the 12th apologized if he had offended her in any way by trying to help her. But Nevaeh assured him that he had in no way hurt her feelings, as he was the first to show her such kindness. His Highness replied that he was glad to hear that, and noted that it was time for him to return to the reception, suggesting that she stay here and calm down. But Nevaeh said that the host of the evening could not leave the victim alone when something like this had happened, so she asked him not to leave. The emperor did not expect to hear this from the girl, and in the meantime, she repeated her question about whether she looked helpless and asked if he would like her to look that way. And while His Highness was trying to understand what exactly the innocent girl, who had just been harassed by the entire crowd, wanted to hear from him, she directly said that she had heard that His Highness was looking for a bride. The man asked if the girl knew who was standing before her. Nevaeh said his name. Then Joachim the 12th, kissing her hand, said that he was glad that the girl knew who was talking to her. She didn't take her passionate gaze from his eyes and asked him to marry her. That's why she admitted that she had taken the courage to be straightforward with him. The girl bowed and repeated once again that she was asking Joachim the 12th to marry her. The emperor, who had not expected that someone would dare to ask for his hand and heart so directly, looked at her with his mouth open. It was then, looking at the beautiful girl in front of him, that the emperor admitted to himself that she had successfully set a trap, and he, rushing to her rescue, had ended up exactly where she wanted to go. The emperor frankly said that he did not think that marriage to him was the best way to escape the empire, and that she would have to work hard and endure many trials before she could get used to the new environment. Nevaeh listened attentively to everything His Highness had listed and said that she expected only one thing from the emperor. Joachim the 12th asked with curiosity what exactly she wanted. Then Nevaeh clearly replied that she wanted the emperor to always be on her side, because she wanted to marry someone she could trust and did not want to have any romantic feelings for him. The girl added that she wished her husband would always support her, as he was in the main hall today. Then, the emperor said that he was somewhat surprised and asked how far she could go to intentionally get close to him. And then the emperor closed his eyes and told her not to answer that question because he did not want to know about it. Then Nevaeh promised that she would no longer bother His Highness. The girl began to say that she would never ask for special treatment or love and would not become a heavy burden for him, something he might regret someday in the future. Nevaeh continued to say that she was not one of those socialite girls who loved pomp and wealth, and she also promised never to get him into any trouble. The girl endlessly listed the advantages of marrying her, which she had prepared in advance. She analyzed the conversation she had witnessed at one of the banquets and noted only those moments that the emperor himself wanted to see in his bride. Joachim XII approached the young girl and took her hand. He asked her to stop talking and looked into her eyes. When their eyes met, they simply stared at each other in silence. The emperor put his finger to his lips and asked if she could finally stop. He reminded her that they were talking about marriage, not a marriage contract. Nevaeh asked in surprise if they were the same thing. Then the emperor explained that in a contract, there is always a party who reserves the right to dictate the terms, and in marriage, the Mia, both parties should be equal. Then Joachim XII listed 3 conditions that his bride must meet. First, she must have nothing in common with the empress. Second, she must take care of state affairs and, most importantly, not love him. While Nevaeh listened attentively to all the emperor's demands for his bride, Joachim XII asked if she would mind if he gave her his answer tomorrow. His Highness extended his hand to the girl, offering to lead her to the door, and Nevaeh said that she was completely satisfied that the emperor needed to weigh everything before giving a final answer. When Nevaeh was almost at the door, Joachim XII told her to come to the main hall tomorrow at noon, where he would give his answer. The girl nodded, and the emperor said that they would see each other tomorrow. Joachim XII stared at the door behind which the mysterious girl had disappeared for a long time, reflecting on their meeting. Meanwhile, Nevaeh breathed a sigh of relief and thought that she had almost achieved her goal. The aide was worried that His Highness had stayed in the sitting room for so long and went to look for him. When he found Joachim XII, he asked what he was doing there, since His Highness had to return to his guests. When the emperor looked at his assistant, Rudiger was surprised to see his master in a rather good mood. He hadn't seen him so cheerful in a long time, so he asked what had happened. Passing by the confused aide, the emperor cheerfully said that he had finally found himself a bride. The emperor headed for the exit to return to the banquet hall. Rudiger couldn't believe what he had just heard and asked if everything was okay with His Highness, because an hour ago, he had thought they would never finish choosing a bride. Leaving the room, the emperor ordered Rudiger to obtain as much information as possible about Duke Vistache and not to miss anything about his former fiancée, Nevaeh Salti. The aide asked again whether the emperor wanted to know almost everything about the couple and whether he wanted to say that he had chosen Nevaeh as his bride. But Joachim XII noted with a smile that Rudiger had too many questions. Valor couldn't even leave his city until he saw his ex-fiancée come out of the lounge. He couldn't believe his eyes and kept wondering what kind of person she was. Nevaeh did not want to linger at this banquet, as she had already done everything she wanted and set off in search of her younger sister. On the way, she heard the voice of Rabiel, who was thanking someone for a gift. When the girl came closer, she saw how Valor Vistache gave her younger sister a diadem in the form of a wreath. Rabiel was very happy with such a decoration, and when she saw her sister, she boasted to her about such beauty. Then Duke Vistache turned towards Nevaeh, and their eyes met again. The former fiancé obviously wanted to gain her trust through his younger sister and was counting on success. A few minutes earlier at the banquet, Vistache witnessed the aristocrats' attacks on Nevaeh, who expressed their pity for Valère for having lived for 10 years with such a terrible woman. Vistache's former fiancé and said with a smile that it seemed Nevaeh had gotten into trouble because she was not in her right mind. The aristocrats openly said that this was a characteristic feature of all commoners. So it was no wonder that Nevaeh behaved this way. Then Valor asked if Nevaeh Solon is not the daughter of Count Solon. The comrade looked at his interlocutor in surprise and said that it was so. Then Valor asked if any of the aristocrats were afraid that Count Solon would want to take revenge for his daughter. The comrade began to laugh openly and told Valor that there was no question of revenge because it had long been known in higher circles that Nevaeh was nobody to him. Count Solon refused to accept the child of a maidservant, and this had long been a well-known fact. Seeing the surprised expression on his interlocutor's face, he asked his friend if he didn't know about this fact and said that Valor had probably been at war all this time and therefore wasn't aware of all the latest gossip in aristocratic society. Valor stood aside and watched as dirt was poured on his ex-fiancée from all sides and decided that it was unfair and he could not just stay away. Vistash's mind was filled with thoughts that he should intervene in this situation. And finally, when he decided to stand up for Neva and took the first step, he heard the emperor loudly ask Lady Eustace what she was allowing herself to do. So Vistash could only stand and watch as His Highness stood up for Nevaeh and they walked together to the recreation room, holding hands, although only Valor had the right to do so until recently. Now, when he saw Nevaeh, he was very happy and expected to talk to her frankly. But the former bride walked past him, as if not noticing him, and approached Rabiel. Nevaeh asked how long her younger sister had been waiting for her, to which Rabiel said that it hadn't been long at all, and showed her what jewelry Duke Vistash had given her. Nevaeh said that it was quite nice, but they had to hurry home. Valor was surprised that Nevaeh paid no attention to him. Meanwhile, the girl continued to tell her sister that her father would become very worried about their absence and led her to the carriage. Duke Vistash was not going to let his former bride go without a word with her, so he asked loudly what Nevaeh was doing with Joachim the 12th in the recreation room. Hearing this, Nevaeh stopped and asked Rabiel to wait for her in the carriage for a few minutes. The younger sister jumped forward happily, telling her that today had been the best evening of her life. Nevaeh looked at her ex-fiancé and asked what he needed this time. Valor simply replied that he was worried about the girl, to which Nevaeh asked why. The Duke looked at Nevaeh in surprise, and she explained that they had nothing in common now, and people call such behavior after a breakup hypocrisy. Valor explained that he had a reason to be worried, but Nevaeh, not listening, interrupted his speech and said that there were no such reasons and that she did not need his concern, especially since he had never worried about her in 10 years. Duke Vistash tried to explain that he had no idea Lady Eustace would treat Nevaeh this way. The girl interrupted him again and asked if he really thought Lady Eustace was the only one who behaved this way. With tears in her eyes, Nevaeh said that everyone, without exception, treated her in this way. Even his parents and the emperor, whom Valor respected immensely. The girl added that the reason was only because she was an illegitimate child, whom neither her father nor her fiancé had ever honored with their views. Nevaeh added that since she had already broken off the engagement, as he had prevented her, she asked him not to interfere in her affairs any more. Valor asked what she would order him to do when she was insulted in front of him, and she replied that it was the same as before, to stand aside. Nevaeh haughtily said that she had to go because she didn't want rumors to spread that she was clinging to her former fiancé after the engagement was canceled, and resolutely walked to the carriage. When the girl climbed into the carriage, she saw that her younger sister was sleeping soundly on the seat. This was not surprising because it was already quite late, especially since Rabiel had had such a busy day. The girl told the coachman to immediately head to the family estate. As soon as the carriage moved off, Nevaeh thought that it would be better if she and Valor did not meet at all today. The girl remembered an incident from the past when she had become very ill. She had a fever all night and a terrible cough that kept her awake. No one came to her room, and Nevaeh decided that she needed to take some medicine or at least drink something hot, So she decided to get out of bed and go in search of salvation. Nevaeh trudged along the long corridor, thinking that today was much better than yesterday because she could at least get out of bed. She planned to call the maid and return immediately. Passing by the dining room, the girl noticed Valor's family chatting peacefully at the table. Duke Vistache said that the emperor had highly praised Valor's sword skills, and the boy, embarrassed, replied that he still had a lot to learn. The duke smiled and said that his son was not shy, because the emperor would like to meet him in person. The duchess remarked that Valor was still too young, and there was no need to force him to go to the place that gave her a migraine. The duke noted that he had not forced anyone, but had simply said that he would take his son with him to His Highness's reception whenever he wished. Valor himself was very pleased that he had been appreciated at the highest level. Witnessing this conversation, Nevaeh became so bitter that she decided to leave. She was in this huge estate like a ghost, although she lived with the Vistache family under the same roof. The girl understood that she had no place here and that everyone was indifferent to her existence and to the fact that she was now very ill, because no one even asked how she was feeling. After taking a couple of steps, Nevaeh fell, losing consciousness. A maid shouted that Lady Solon had fallen, and the last thing the girl saw was the image of her fiancé screaming for a doctor. Then the girl thought she might be hallucinating because she didn't believe Valor could have approached her. Nevaeh fell into a deep sleep, in which she felt happy and needed. This dream came to the girl often, so she did not want to wake up and find herself completely alone in the huge estate again. When the girl opened her eyes, she saw a maid holding medicine on a tray and asking the lady to take the potions. Nevaeh immediately saw the curtains in her room and asked where they came from. The maid explained that Valor had ordered them brought here yesterday. Every time Nevaeh found it unbearable to stay in the Vistache house, she remembered Valor's kindness and did not leave that cursed estate. But now she understood that this was only a blind and unfulfillable hope. Nevaeh's gaze fell again on her younger sister, who was sleeping peacefully opposite the girl. She caught herself thinking that she was jealous of Rabiel, who still had everything ahead of her, and perhaps her fate would not turn out so badly. The next morning, Nevaeh decided to take a bath right away because today was a big day for her. She remembered all the events that had happened yesterday and replayed everything in her head again. Last night, as soon as they crossed the threshold of the family estate, the Marquis of Solène immediately ran up to Rabiel and asked if everything was okay. The girl smiled cheerfully and said that everything was fine, but she really wanted to sleep. The Marquis said that this was not surprising because she had spent the whole evening on her feet and looked angrily in Nevaeh's direction. Watching her father her, Nevaeh did not even believe that the Marquis of Solon could be a real father. But then the girl decided that it was better for her not to think about these topics and started preparing. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Surprised, Nevaeh went to the door and immediately opened it. Her younger sister stood at the door, smiling and greeting her older sister. Nevaeh asked why she was here, as it was quite unexpected. Rabiel explained that she simply wanted to see her older sister and asked permission to come in. Nevaeh hesitated a little, but still invited her younger sister to come into the room. The girl curiously looked around her older sister's room and looked at the fashionable outfits in the closet. She said that she was very bored of being alone all the time, and Rabiel was glad that Nevaeh had finally come to them. Then Nevaeh asked if the nanny was playing with her younger sister. Rabiel said that the nanny always played the same games. First they read books, then they played with dolls, and then with a ball. Nevaeh advised the girl to invite her friends to the estate or to go to them herself. But Rabiel noticed that the Marquise would not like this idea very much. Speaking of this woman, Rabiel lowered her gaze. The girl explained that her stepmother disliked her and was constantly making a fuss over trifles. Then Nevaeh guessed that the new wife of the Marquis of Solon was probably taking out all her anger on this girl. Nevaeh felt sorry for her younger sister because she realized that the girl was also not happy in her own estate and invited Rabiel to come to her room whenever she wanted. Rabiel was delighted and said that she would take advantage of this invitation as soon as she received permission from her father, because he had told her not to approach Nevaeh. Then Nevaeh asked her younger sister which dress she liked best, and the girl unequivocally answered that it was white. Meanwhile, Emperor Joachim XII was reviewing the documents and asked Rüdiger if that was all he had managed to find out. The aide was indignant, as he had had to hire several more people to gather this information. His Highness looked at the aide and noted that Rüdiger had missed something extremely important from the very beginning and asked why Duke Vistache had such an impeccable reputation. Rüdiger could not understand why the emperor had suddenly become interested in this Vistache and advised him to ask his fiancée about valor. The emperor immediately corrected him by saying that he had a former fiancée. Although Rüdiger agreed with his highness, he still reminded him that Nevaeh Solon and Valor Vistache have lived together for 10 years. Although, looking at them, you could say that they behave more like two strangers and nothing more. The emperor recalled that it was because of Rüdiger that he had decided to look for a bride in the Terry Empire. The aide smiled and said that now it was clear why they had gone in search of a bride here. Rüdiger noted that Terry's empire was an extremely beautiful place, and all the ladies there were friendly and kind. He asked to draw his highness's attention to his girlfriend, and then everything would immediately become clear to Joachim XII. Then Rüdiger remembered that about the inappropriate couple where a prince from a neighboring country was responsible for the pregnancy of a princess. He had never heard of such a scandal and was ashamed for his compatriots. The emperor reminded them that despite this, they still loved each other and asked the aide what time it was. Rüdiger reminded them that he would soon meet with His Highness Bertrand in the main hall. Nevaeh was also hurrying to meet Emperor Joachim XII. She nevertheless put on a white dress as her younger sister advised her and did not understand why the emperor had scheduled their meeting in the main hall. Nevaeh thought that if the emperor was planning to propose, he would have chosen a more secluded place to do so, and she worried that His Highness was up to something. Then Nevaeh heard two ladies gossiping about His Highness announcing an engagement today. Nevaeh also heard that the aristocratic ladies were hurrying to the main hall to find out who would be Joachim XII's bride. They were discussing that he had recently been looking at Count Anatole for a long time, so they thought that his daughter would most likely be the candidate. Nevaeh began to worry even more, because she had a suspicion that His Highness had invited her precisely to show her the real bride, and she did not want to believe that Joachim XII was capable of such a thing. Before entering the main hall, Nevaeh hesitated and was about to turn around and walk away when the door suddenly opened and someone in the hall said loudly that she had finally arrived. Nevaeh noticed when she entered the hall was Emperor Bertrand himself, who was sitting on the main throne and looking at the girl with interest. All the most famous aristocrats of the empire gathered next to the emperor, including her father, Valor Vistache, and several other famous dukes and marquises that Nevaeh had met before. Nevaeh was confused and did not know what to do until her eyes met His Highness's. Joachim XII began to smile when he saw her, and when she looked into his eyes, all her fears receded by themselves. Emperor Joachim XII immediately approached Nevaeh and took her by the hand. He confidently led her to the emperor and said that this was the girl he wanted to see by his side. A few minutes later, Rüdiger and His Highness were discussing the fact that secular society was drowning in rumors because Joachim XII had asked Bertrand to announce the engagement in the main banquet hall. Joachim XII listened with interest to the latest news and asked if such a resonance was caused by his engagement to Lady Solène. But Reidiger, smiling, replied that this name had never been mentioned by aristocrats. Emperor Joachim XII asked why, since he had accompanied Nevaeh to a banquet the previous day. Then, Ridiger remarked that it seemed to the aristocrats that the emperor had behaved this way towards the girl out of pity. Already in the main banquet hall, Joachim XII thanked Bertrand for giving him the opportunity to choose a bride in the Empire of Terry, and Emperor Joachim XII gladly took advantage of this opportunity. Bertrand smiled and said that there was no need to thank him because such an alliance would only contribute to improving the relationship between Wifrind and Terry. And regardless of Joachim XII's decision, he thanked him for choosing their bride. Joachim XII thanked Emperor Bertrand again for the opportunity and said loudly that he still could not believe that his bride had agreed to marry him. He added that he was enchanted by her beauty and had invited her here today. Bertrand asked Joachim XII if his chosen one had not yet responded with his consent. Joachim XII noted that everyone, including himself, would witness the proposal, and he hoped for the best. Emperor Terry looked at His Highness with curiosity and asked who was this girl who had stolen his heart. After this question, Joachim XII was just about to name the girl when suddenly the door to the main hall opened. Nevaeh appeared on the threshold in a white dress, looking like a bride. She looked around with fear at everyone present, and Joachim XII encouraged them by saying that the girl had arrived just in time. Emperor Joachim XII immediately took the girl's hand so that she would not worry and told Bertrand that this was the girl he wanted to see by his side. The confused Nevaeh gathered herself and smiled at His Highness. The aristocrats began to whisper, not expecting that the emperor's chosen bride would be Nevaeh. She was the last woman in the empire they had considered when they were considering candidates for the position of hand and heart. Nevaeh breathed a sigh of relief and realized that from the very beginning, His Highness had not even thought of giving her up. Meanwhile, Joachim XII smiled and, looking at those present, asked why their faces had changed so much. His Highness fixed his gaze on Valérie Vistasha and said that he had not particularly expected such a reaction from him, emphasizing that he had never seen Valérie like this before, asking if he was uncomfortable. Valor told His Highness that this girl was his former fiancée, and they had been engaged for 10 years, thanks to an oath their parents had made long before they were born. After listening to Valor's explanation, the emperor only remarked that, in any case, they were nobody to each other now. Looking at Nevaeh, Joachim XII asked if he was right. Nevaeh nodded in confusion and gave the emperor credit for playing the public quite well. Nevaeh felt like the winner in this battle with Valor, and looking at her former fiancé out of the corner of her eye, noticed that he was so convincing that she wouldn't even say that they had lived apart for 10 years. The girl did not believe that she would be able to put an end to her painful relationship with Duke Vistache. So, bowing before Emperor Bertrand, she asked for permission to address him. When Bertrand nodded, the girl said that she was Nevaeh, Solon, who previously bore the surname Vistache, but from now on, she asked to be called Terry. Nevaeh confidently said that she would glorify the Terry Empire as the daughter of His Highness. About herself, the girl added that from now on she would live a new life, with a new name, and would hope to never visit this place again. Joachim XII invited her to the first dance, and circling with him to the sounds of a waltz, she reflected that today's events would become a new chapter in her life, which she had repeatedly dreamed of before. Joachim XII asked how she was feeling, and Nevaeh admitted that she was surprised. The emperor then explained that it was actually revenge on her for yesterday, as he was pleased to see her surprised expression. Nevaeh asked if the emperor could make such jokes. Joachim XII noted with a smile that everyone in his empire had long been used to it, so he wouldn't be able to pull off something like that there anymore. Nevaeh asked if he was sure that she would always be on his side. The emperor nodded in the affirmative. Then the girl asked how she could confirm the fact that she would never fall in love with him. The emperor confidently stated that he did not think that would happen after recent events, as her past already spoke for her. Nevaeh could not get used to such frankness from the emperor, so she blinked her eyes in confusion. After the dance, the girl bowed and thanked Joachim XII for his hard work. Nevaeh herself was noted for never thinking that her difficult past would ever play into her favor. His Highness tenderly kissed her hand and asked her to continue to look after him in the future. He said that unfortunately, he had to leave for a while to meet the emperor. Tenderly kissing his bride, the emperor whispered that he would definitely return soon and advised her not to play with fire, not to walk on thin ice, and to have a good time. Nevaeh promised that she would do everything in her power. Nevaeh remarked that although this was ordinary gallantry, she could not get used to it. After the dance, she was immediately surrounded by aristocratic women who began to give various compliments about their first dance. The ladies were constantly greeting Nevaeh and saying they were glad to be her friends. The aristocrats who had been harassing her with their whole crowd yesterday were today trying to enlist her support, and Nevaeh was disgusted by this. Fortunately, Valar Vistache approached them and said that Lady Solon was looking for His Highness immediately, so he advised the girl to hurry to his office. Nevaeh mechanically followed Duke Vistache and thanked him on the way for saving her from socializing with aristocrats. As it was really hard for her, Valar noted that anyone in his place would have done the same. But then Nevaeh firmly said that next time she would ask him not to help her. She had already emphasized this before and wanted to avoid spreading idle gossip about them. Nevaeh emphasized that she was getting married quite soon, so she could no longer count on Duke Vistache's support. Valar did not expect such categoricalness from his former fiancée, so he did not know what to answer her.